Where the Enschede fireworks disaster would start as a horrible event in Dutch history, it would eventually culminate into a massive conspiracy across all layers of the Dutch government. On the 13th of May 2000, a fire would break out in the warehouse of SE Fireworks in Enschede. The company was adamant no one worked that day, but it was later found multiple employees were lying about their whereabouts. No conclusive evidence was found pointing to either arson or even an accident, leaving the cause a complete mystery to this day. It was found most likely that the fire started in the workshop, which then spread to something outside and would eventually alight the ship containers. The fire department quenched the flames and was about to leave when multiple explosions occurred, the strongest of which had a force equivalent to at least 4,000 kilograms of TNT. This final explosion destroyed 42 hectares of the city, damaging over 2,000 buildings, injuring nearly 1,000, and killing 23, 4 of which were firemen. The blast was audible from more than 60 kilometers away, which makes obvious the 1 billion guilder price tag, approximately 454 million euros. It would take years for the city to rebuild and give the more than 1,200 homeless a new place. There were many irregularities which may be used to explain the severity of the disaster. The most major one, the apparent lack of knowledge of the company's existence. Neither the local authorities nor surrounding residents knew what was going on in the building. Even the fire department responded thinking it was a paper warehouse. In this article, even more problems are described. The material was not kept in underground bunkers, as is the norm in such cases and officially prescribed. Instead, it was stored in ship containers arranged closely together at ground level, and not separated either by customary yard walls or any other form of partitioning. The doors of the container were often left standing open. That such an occurrence was a rule rather than the exception can be observed from various newspaper reports. In these reports, Martin Volk, the leading pyrotechnic expert of the Berlin County Office for Criminal Investigation, had the opportunity to give his impressions of SE fireworks from a visit last November. Volk noticed at the time the open container doors and the direct proximity of the housing community, something highly unusual for this kind of industry. The premises also lacked lightning conductors, emergency escape routes, and any kind of safety construction. The stockpiled goods were even falsely labeled, warning of less danger than was actually the case. Nevertheless, Volk shared the view of other experts that even this degree of negligence was not enough to explain an explosion of the magnitude that occurred in Enschede. Regarding the containers that were outside the norm, they were actually authorized by the council themselves, and the unusual location was also perpetuated by the council by refusing the company's request to move elsewhere. An international warrant was issued for the arrest of both directors of the company for intentionally violating environmental regulations and trading in illegal fireworks. They would also be charged with involuntary manslaughter. On the 2nd of April 2002, both men would be convicted to 6 months of prison time, of which 3 conditional and a €2,250 fine. They would be exonerated on the charge of manslaughter, as there was no proof the disaster happened because of their negligence. They immediately filed an appeal, where they would be convicted and would receive a doubled prison sentence of a year. If the fault did not lie with the company, and the chances of it being purely accidental were small, the most likely scenario remaining was arson. According to witness testimony, someone was seen leaving the building shortly before the disaster, and the case against prime suspect André de Vries would be a very peculiar one. A sketch was made according to witness testimony, which included the suspect wearing red shorts. Even though our suspect did not actually look like the sketch, he was arrested when trying to torch his own car. At this time, he was also wearing the described shorts, upon which firework traces would be discovered. A phone was also recovered, placing him at the scene, and he would give his own statement which would be used against him. Upon this basis, he would be convicted to 15 years in prison. While this might seem like evidence, it actually proves nothing. He didn't have the phone at the time, the traces on his clothes were minimal, and none were found in his other belongings or in his house. Apparently, there's even 2 different sets of clothes, basically ruling it out as evidence. That leaves us with only 2 testimonies against him. The witness did not recognize him, and his own testimony was untrustworthy. He would be absolved on the 12th of May 2003, and that's where the prosecution ends. The disaster would lead to an examination of the legislations, but it shouldn't have. What if I tell you this wasn't the first disaster, and the lessons had been learned already, just ignored by the powers that be? The fireworks disaster in Culemborg happened all the way back on the 14th of February 1991. At around 11:50 am, a very powerful explosion would erupt from inside of MS Fireworks. The resulting shockwave shattered windows in a 5-kilometer radius and spread debris all over the area, the force of which flung it through the surrounding houses. Luckily, the company was located in a remote area with only few close-by houses, resulting in only 2 deaths, 2 of the employees. The fire department arrived on scene quickly, but did not dare approach, as they weren't sure what materials were stored in the premises, and as a result could not assess the situation. A dozen homes were ruined, and inhabitants were left stranded in their decrepit abodes. Many of the residents were not insured themselves, and had to wait on the insurance companies to pay out the business insurance. This, however, would take a very long time. The insurers kept on waiting for the resolution of the investigation, and with the investigators unable to find someone to blame, they would keep dawdling to avoid paying. This resolution would never arrive, and after no less than 25 months, they were unable to keep stalling and paid 660,000 guilders. No conclusive cause, just like the disaster that will happen 9 years later. Yet the investigators did conclude relatively light fireworks, if stored in large quantities and outside of original packaging, would create a far larger explosion than they had assumed. Furthermore, they found the classifications were faulty, and the stock was far more dangerous than was allowed. A recommendation was written advising the authorities to change the legislations and to make sure classifications were in order. Nothing would end up happening with this, however. As to why, the Dutch model of governance chooses to spread around responsibility, often in truly confounding ways. No one was the responsible official of the responsible ministry, and so they chose not to do anything and instead pass it around amongst each other until it was forgotten. Which brings us back to Enschede. In the years after, one of the directors, Rudy Bakker, would file multiple review requests, all 3 of which would be dismissed. But the last one is of great interest, as it was accompanied by a 5-year-long investigation by well-known whistleblower Paul van Buitenen. Based on his findings, he would file a complaint against the government and the municipality of Enschede in October 2019. They had undermined the Dutch rule of law and not only caused a disaster, but intentionally covered up their failures by manipulating the investigation to exclude any mention of the faulty legislations or any of their numerous other deficiencies. In his complaint, he accused close to 100 officials of manslaughter, perjury, forgery, and a bunch of other misdemeanors. The list of shortcomings only grew with his report. To list all of them, the legislations on fireworks were insufficient on account of a lack of knowledge about the reactivity, especially in the case of light fireworks. This lack and other gaps in knowledge made the danger classifications located on the packaging faulty, and the danger far more potent than was suspected up till now. Furthermore, the firefighting instructions were wrong and had possibly made the disaster worse, as some chemicals can cause an explosion if doused with water. Lastly, there were problems with the control and granting of licenses, in part because the responsibilities were spread around multiple agencies. It's finally time to introduce one of the major players, Jan Paalman, one of the officers of the toll team which was tasked with investigating the disaster. After seeing many irregularities in the investigation, he and one of his colleagues would decide to make a report of their own. When they submitted it to officials, they were lauded for their objective police work, something the official report lacked, yet they would soon after be investigated by internal affairs for gross dereliction of duty and incompetence, and be left without a job. I will now list the copious mistakes and aberrations. The investigation started with witness testimonies. They all mentioned fireworks going off before the disaster, yet it would be excluded from the official report. The ship containers had wooden boards on the floor, yet the report mentions only steel. It was decided to use a wiretap on one of the employees, yet the day after the recording, he was told the device had unexpectedly failed. When he called the responsible office, the officer there told him he was ordered not to get involved by his boss. After requesting the original report himself, he read there were no malfunctions and the recordings would have commenced the following day. The police said all company records had been lost and decided to request the records of all suppliers to make their own stock calculation, a very costly and time-consuming procedure which was completely unnecessary, as the records did survive. But with these estimations of stock, they could easily claim there were large amounts of illegal goods, when there is no actual proof of this. The court case against both men is even worse. Great effort was taken to exclude anything that would prove their competence. Everything was pulled out to slander them. 10 years after the disaster, Baumann had gathered enough new information that an investigation was launched to see if the original had been executed correctly. The survey questions would be narrowed, and the team responsible would be changed over and over again, until the people who made the original would be asked to conclude the investigation. Conclusion: there is no proof any mistakes were made. And that would be it. I already spoiled that the review request was denied, and the complaint would not be handled. The retardation of central government had won once again. There are many more examples of irregularities in the 1400-page report. If anything ever ends up happening, I will cover it, but I wouldn't count on it. This was the Lore Sanctum. Have a nice day.